The man standing before me looked like he'd aged 30 years in the past 5. Daniel Rivera, 52 years old according to the file, but he could have been 70. His clothes were layered, mismatched, the kind of outfit someone wears when they're carrying everything they own on their body. His face was weathered, deeply lined, his hair long and unkempt. His hands trembled slightly as they gripped a worn plastic bag containing what I assumed were his possessions, but it was his eyes that caught my attention. Beneath the exhaustion, beneath the obvious struggle of just existing, there was something else, a clarity, an intelligence, the look of someone who'd once been something other than what he was now. The file in front of me was thick, unusually thick for what should have been routine violations. I flipped through page after page, sleeping in prohibited areas, loitering, public urination, failure to appear, failure to appear, failure to appear. The citations went back 2 years, each one unpaid, each failure to appear adding more fees, more penalties, more interest. The total at the bottom of the page made me pause. $10,847. $10,847 in fines and fees for a man who was clearly homeless. A man who probably didn't have $10 in his pocket, let alone 10,000. This was the kind of case that made me question the entire system. We cite people for being poor, for being homeless, for existing in public spaces because they have nowhere private to go. Then we fine them amounts they could never pay. Then we issue warrants when they don't appear in court because they don't have transportation, or they forgot the date because they're dealing with hunger and cold and the daily struggle of survival. And the debt grows and grows until it becomes an impossible mountain that ensures they'll never escape the cycle. I'd seen versions of this story hundreds of times, but something about Daniel Rivera made me pause, made me want to understand. "Mr. Rivera," I began, my voice gentle, "you've been cited 17 times over the past 2 years, multiple failures to appear. The fines total nearly $11,000. Help me understand your situation." He looked up at me and I saw shame flood his face. "Your Honor, I know I owe the money. I know I missed the court dates. I'm not trying to make excuses. His voice trailed off. "Go on," I encouraged. "I don't have anywhere to go. I sleep where I can. Sometimes I forget what day it is, what month it is. I got the citations. I knew I was supposed to appear, but I didn't have bus fare, and the courthouse is 4 miles from where I usually stay. And honestly, Your Honor, I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid of this. Of standing here with a debt I can never pay. Of being told I'm going to jail because I'm homeless. Of the whole system crushing me even more than I'm already crushed." His honesty was raw, unfiltered. No attorney had coached him on what to say. This was just truth, painful and direct. I looked at the citations more carefully. Most were from the same area, a 3-block radius in downtown Providence. "Mr. Rivera, these citations, most of them are from the Kennedy Plaza area. Is that where you stay?" "Yes, Your Honor. There's a shelter 2 blocks away, but it's always full. I get in maybe 2 nights a week if I'm lucky. The other nights I sleep outside, the benches, doorways, wherever I won't get hassled. But the police come through every morning around 6. They wake us up, tell us to move. Sometimes they write tickets. If you believe we should treat our homeless with dignity instead of citations, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what I'm about to ask this man, and what he's about to tell me, will break your heart and change how you see every homeless person you pass on the street." I set down the file and looked at Daniel carefully. There was something about him, about the way he carried himself despite his circumstances, that made me curious. "Mr. Rivera, before we talk about these fines, I want to ask you something. What did you do before you became homeless?" He looked surprised by the question, like no one had asked him about his past in years, like he'd become invisible, defined only by his current state. "Your Honor, I was a teacher, high school English. I taught for 16 years at Mount Pleasant High School." The courtroom went silent. A teacher. This homeless man with $10,000 in fines had been a teacher. "What happened?" I asked quietly. Daniel took a shaky breath. "My wife died 6 years ago. Cancer. We had insurance, but it wasn't enough. The medical bills were crushing. We'd already refinanced the house once. When she passed, I had $140,000 in medical debt. I tried to keep working, tried to keep the house, but I was drowning. I was teaching full-time, tutoring on weekends, but I couldn't keep up." He paused, his hands gripping the plastic bag tighter. "I started having panic attacks in class. Severe anxiety. I'd be in the middle of teaching Shakespeare and suddenly I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The school was supportive at first. They gave me time off, but it kept happening. Eventually, I had to take a medical leave. I lost the house 2 years later, foreclosure. I moved into an apartment, but without the teaching income, just my disability payments, I couldn't afford it for long. The disability covered about $1,400 a month. Rent was $1,100. After utilities and medication for the anxiety, there was nothing left for food. I got evicted after 4 months of missed rent. I lived in my car for a while, a 2004 Honda Civic. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. Then the car broke down. The repair was $800. I didn't have it. The car got towed from where it broke down. More fees I couldn't pay, so I lost that too. His voice was steady now, like he was reciting facts that had happened to someone else. That was 2 years ago. I've been on the street since then. I try to get into the shelter, but there's a waiting list. I'm on it. I've been on it for 18 months. They tell me maybe another 6 months and a bed will open up. Until then, I sleep outside, and I get citations for sleeping outside, and the debt grows. And I can't get out. I sat back, processing this. A teacher, 16 years of service, educating children, shaping young minds. Now homeless, buried in fines for the crime of having nowhere to go. Mr. Rivera, you mentioned disability payments. Is that related to your service? I see here you're listed as a veteran. His posture straightened slightly. Yes, Your Honor. I served in the Army, 1991 to 1995. I was in the first Gulf War, combat engineer. I took some shrapnel in Kuwait, nothing that got me sent home, but it qualified me for VA disability later. The anxiety, the PTSD, it's all service-connected. The VA rates me at 40% disabled. A veteran, a teacher, a widower who'd lost everything trying to save his wife. And now he stood in my courtroom with $10,000 in fines for being homeless. This is what's wrong with our system. We stack penalties on people who are already at the bottom, ensuring they can never climb out. We criminalize poverty and homelessness, then act surprised when the problem gets worse. I looked at the prosecutor, Jennifer Chen. Miss Chen, what's the city's position on this case? She stood, and I could see the discomfort on her face. She'd read the file, too. Your Honor, the violations are documented. Mr. Rivera has repeatedly failed to appear. The fines are calculated according to the standard schedule. However, given the circumstances, if the court wants to consider alternatives, the city would be open to discussion. Alternatives like what? A payment plan? How is a homeless man living on $1,400 a month in disability going to pay $10,000? Your Honor, perhaps community service in lieu of fines? I turned back to Daniel. Mr. Rivera, if I converted your fines to community service at the standard rate of $10 per hour of service credit, you'd owe 1,084 hours. That's 27 weeks of full-time work. You're homeless. You're dealing with PTSD and anxiety. You're trying to survive day to day. Is that realistic? He shook his head. No, Your Honor. I can barely manage to exist right now. I wouldn't be able to complete that. This is the impossible situation we create. Fines they can't pay. Community service they can't complete. Warrants that ensure they'll be arrested the next time they interact with police. We build a trap with no exit. I flipped through the citations again, reading each one carefully. And that's when I noticed something that changed everything. Mr. Rivera, I said slowly, these 17 citations, 4 of them are for sleeping in Kennedy Plaza. The ordinance cited is Municipal Code 14309, correct? I think so, Your Honor. I don't remember the specific code numbers. I turned to Miss Reyes, my clerk. Pull up Municipal Code 14309. I want the exact language and the effective date. She typed quickly. After a moment she looked up, her expression puzzled. Your Honor, Municipal Code 14309 was repealed 16 months ago. It was replaced by 14309A, which has different enforcement provisions and specifically exempts individuals with documented disabilities from citation between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. if shelters are at capacity. I felt something shift in my chest. Miss Chen, did you hear that? The prosecutor was already flipping through her files. Your Honor, I'm checking the citation dates now. I did the math quickly. 4 citations under a repealed ordinance. That's 4 invalid citations right there. Miss Reyes, what's the total fine amount for those 4 citations, including all the failure to appear fees and interest? She calculated. $3,840. I turned back to the prosecutor. Miss Chen, the city issued citations under an ordinance that didn't exist. Those citations are invalid. Agreed? She nodded slowly. Agreed, Your Honor. Those should be dismissed. That brings Mr. Rivera's total down to $7,007, but I'm not done. I kept reading. 3 more citations are for public urination. Mr. Rivera, where do these incidents occur? Near Kennedy Plaza, Your Honor. There are no public restrooms available at night. The shelter is closed to non-residents. The businesses are closed. When you need to go, there's nowhere to go. I looked at Jennifer Chen. The city closed the public restrooms at Kennedy Plaza 4 years ago due to budget cuts. Is that correct? I believe so, Your Honor. So we closed the public restrooms, then we cite homeless people for urinating in public when they have no access to facilities. Does that seem like justice to you, Miss Chen? She was quiet for a moment. No, Your Honor, it doesn't. I'm dismissing those 3 citations. The city created the condition that led to the violation. That's not Mr. Rivera's fault. I calculated again. 3 citations with fees, that's another $2,190. Mr. Rivera's total is now down to $4,817. I kept going through the file, examining each citation with the kind of scrutiny I should have been applying to cases like this all along. 2 citations for loitering, both issued at 2:30 a.m. Mr. Rivera, what were you doing? Sitting on a bench, Your Honor, trying to sleep. Not blocking anyone, not threatening anyone, not engaging in criminal activity? No, Your Honor, just existing. I looked up at Jennifer Chen. The loitering ordinance requires that the individual be blocking public access or creating a safety hazard. Was Mr. Rivera doing either? She checked the officer's notes on the citations. The notes say, subject sitting on bench, appeared to be sleeping. No mention of blocking access or safety hazards. Then these citations don't meet the legal standard for loitering. Dismissed. Another $1,680 gone. The total was now $3,137. I continued through the remaining citations. Some were legitimate, violations that occurred regardless of his homelessness. But many were questionable, the result of officers citing him simply for being visibly homeless in public spaces. By the time I finished my review, I'd dismissed 11 of the 17 citations. The remaining 6, with all fees and interest, totaled $1,240. I set down the file and looked at Daniel Rivera. Mr. Rivera, I've dismissed 11 of your citations. Various legal deficiencies, repealed ordinances, lack of alternative facilities, citations that don't meet the statutory requirements. Your total fine is now $1,240, not $10,847. His eyes widened. Tears started rolling down his weathered face. Your Honor, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything yet. I'm not finished. The remaining 6 citations are valid. You were cited for violations that, regardless of your circumstances, occurred. I can't dismiss those. But here's what I can do. I turned to my clerk. Miss Reyes, contact the Veterans Service Office immediately. I want Mr. Rivera enrolled in every program he qualifies for. Housing assistance, VA health care, food assistance, emergency financial support, everything. I looked back at Daniel. Mr. Rivera, you're a veteran. You're a disabled veteran. There are programs specifically designed to help people in your situation. Have you applied for any of them? I tried, Your Honor, but the paperwork, the requirements, the appointments, when you're homeless, when you're dealing with anxiety and PTSD, navigating bureaucracy is almost impossible. I'd start an application and lose the paperwork. I'd have an appointment and forget the date. It all felt overwhelming. That's going to change. Miss Reyes is going to coordinate with Veterans Services. They're going to assign you a caseworker who will help you navigate every system. They're going to help you get housing, get your medical care through the VA, get the support you need. I paused. But I'm also going to do something else. The remaining fines, $1,240, I'm converting that to community service at $15 per hour, not the standard $10. That's 83 hours. But here's the specific service you're going to perform. I looked at him carefully. You were a teacher, Mr. Rivera, English literature. For 16 years you educated young people. That skill, that knowledge, that experience doesn't disappear because you're homeless. So here's your community service. You're going to volunteer at the Providence Public Library. 83 hours. You're going to help kids with reading, with homework, with literacy. You're going to tutor. You're going to share the knowledge you spent 16 years teaching. Daniel's face transformed. The shame, the defeat, was replaced by something I hadn't seen since he'd walked into the courtroom. Hope. You're going to do this once you're housed, I continued, because you can't help others until we help you. Miss Reyes will make sure the Veteran Services connects you with emergency housing within the next 72 hours. Even if it's transitional, even if it's temporary, you need to be inside. You need stability before you can fulfill this service requirement. I stood up and came down from the bench, walking over to where Daniel stood. Mr. Rivera, listen to me carefully. You are not defined by these past 2 years. You're not defined by being homeless. You're a veteran who served your country. You're a teacher who shaped young minds for 16 years. You're a husband who loved his wife so much you bankrupted yourself trying to save her. Those things define you. This temporary situation of homelessness doesn't erase any of that. He was crying openly now. Your Honor, I thought I was going to jail today. I thought my life was over. I've felt invisible for 2 years, like I don't matter, like I'm just a problem to be moved along or cited or ignored. You matter, Mr. Rivera. You've always mattered. I turned to the gallery. How many veterans do we have in the courtroom today? 4 people stood up, different ages, different service eras, but united by their military service. Approach, please. They came forward. I explained Daniel's situation quickly, his service, his homelessness, the overwhelming debt that had just been reduced but was still a barrier. What can you do to help one of your brothers? An older man, probably late 60s, spoke first. Judge, I'm Thomas Wade, Marine Corps, Vietnam. I'll put in $200 toward getting him stable. First month's rent contribution, whatever he needs. A woman, maybe 50, stepped forward. Angela Martinez, Army, Gulf War. Same era as Daniel. I'll contribute $100, and I'll talk to my church. We run a veteran support group. We can help him get connected. One by one, they pledged money, offered support, provided contacts. Within 10 minutes, they'd raised $640 and offered connections to jobs, housing resources, counseling services, a whole network of support. I looked at the remaining gallery. Anyone else want to help a homeless veteran get back on his feet? More people came forward. A young woman gave $20. It's all I have today, but I was homeless 3 years ago. Someone help me. I'm passing it forward. An elderly couple contributed $50. A businessman in a suit gave $100. Within 20 minutes, $980 had been collected, almost enough to cover Daniel's remaining fines. The last $260 I paid myself. I pulled out my personal checkbook and wrote a check to the court, marked for Daniel Rivera's fines. Your Honor, Daniel said, his voice choked with emotion. You can't do that. You shouldn't have to do that. Mr. Rivera, I've sat on this bench for 38 years. I've imposed tens of thousands of fines. I've collected millions of dollars for this city. Today, I'm spending $260 of my own money to help a veteran who fell through every crack in our system. It's not charity. It's justice. Your fines are paid in full. The courtroom erupted in applause. People were standing, clapping, some crying. Daniel stood there overwhelmed, his plastic bag of possessions still clutched in his hand, surrounded by strangers who'd become a community of support in less than an hour. Your Honor, he managed to say, how do I ever repay this? You don't repay it, you pay it forward. You get housed. You get stable. You complete your 83 hours at the library helping kids learn to read. And then, when you're on your feet, when you see another person struggling the way you've struggled, you help them. That's how this works. That's how we fix broken systems, one person at a time. I returned to the bench. All citations resolved. Fines paid in full through community contribution and court adjustment. Mr. Rivera, you report to Miss Reyes before you leave today. She'll have contact information for Veterans Services. You call them this afternoon. You start the process of getting your life back. Understood? Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. Thank you so much. Don't thank me. Thank the people who stood up to help. Thank the system that should have helped you 2 years ago but failed. And thank yourself for surviving these 2 years with your dignity and decency intact. That took more strength than most people will ever understand. The gavel fell. But before Daniel could leave, Thomas Wade, the Vietnam Marine, approached him. Brother, you're not alone anymore. You've got my number. You call me if you need anything. Food, rides to appointments, someone to talk to. We take care of our own. Daniel broke down completely, then This 52-year-old man who'd survived war and loss and homelessness, crying in the arms of a stranger who understood because he'd worn the same uniform decades earlier. Share this video if you believe we should help our homeless, not find them. Comment below if you've ever felt invisible, forgotten by the systems that are supposed to protect you, because what happened next showed that sometimes one moment of compassion creates ripples that change everything. 3 days after the hearing, Ms. Reyes called me with an update. Daniel Rivera had been placed in transitional housing through a VA program. 2 bedrooms, shared with another veteran, clean, safe, stable. He had his first counseling appointment scheduled. He'd been connected with a VA social worker who was helping him navigate disability benefits, health care, all the services he'd been unable to access while homeless. 2 weeks later, the Providence Public Library called. Daniel had started his community service. The head librarian wanted me to know that he was extraordinary with the kids. Patient, knowledgeable, passionate about reading. They asked if he'd be willing to continue volunteering after his 83 hours were complete. He said yes. 6 weeks after the hearing, I received a letter. Dear Judge Caprio, I'm writing from my apartment. I have an apartment. Those words still feel unreal. I have a bed, a bathroom, a kitchen. I have privacy and safety and warmth. I've been homeless for 2 years, and I'd forgotten what it felt like to close a door and know that the space behind it was mine. The Veterans Services caseworker, Maria, has been incredible. She's helped me apply for increased disability benefits. She's gotten me enrolled in VA healthcare. She's helped me understand programs I didn't even know existed. But more than the practical help, you gave me something I'd lost. You saw me, not as a homeless person, not as a case number, not as a problem to be moved along. You saw me as a veteran, as a teacher, as a human being with a history and dignity. For 2 years, I've been invisible. People look past me, through me, around me. Police see me as someone to cite. Business owners see me as someone to chase away. Most people don't see me at all. You looked at me and asked about my life before homelessness. That one question, what did you do before you became homeless? That question reminded me that I was something before this, that I could be something after this. I'm working at the library 3 afternoons a week now. I've completed 40 of my 83 required hours, but I'm going to keep volunteering long after that. There's a 12-year-old boy named Marcus who comes in every Tuesday. He's struggling with reading, falling behind in school. His mom works 2 jobs. I've been tutoring him for 3 weeks. Yesterday, he read an entire chapter out loud without stopping. When he finished, he looked up at me and said, "Mr. Rivera, I did it," I cried, because I remembered what it felt like to help a student succeed. I remembered why I became a teacher. I'm not all the way back yet. The anxiety is still there. The PTSD still flares up. Some days are harder than others. But I'm not surviving anymore. I'm living. I'm contributing. I matter. Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked away. Thank you for asking the question that changed everything. And thank you for showing me that even when you're at the very bottom, there are still people who will reach down and pull you back up. Respectfully, Daniel Rivera, U.S. Army teacher, volunteer. I kept that letter. I keep it in the same drawer as the others, the letters from people whose lives intersected with my courtroom in moments that mattered. Because Daniel Rivera's letter reminds me why that one question was so important. What did you do before you became homeless? That question acknowledged that homelessness is a temporary state, not an identity. It recognized that behind every person sleeping on a bench or carrying their possessions in a plastic bag is a full human being with skills, history, dignity, worth. If I just looked at Daniel as a homeless man with $10,000 in fines, I would have processed him through the system. Payment plan he couldn't afford, warrants when he didn't pay, eventual arrest. The cycle would have continued. But by asking about his past, by taking the time to see him fully, I discovered a veteran, a teacher, a widower who'd lost everything trying to save his wife. And once I saw him fully, I couldn't just find him and move on. I had to actually help. 8 months after that hearing, the Providence City Council passed new regulations regarding citations for homelessness-related offenses. Officers are now required to offer resources before issuing citations. The public restrooms at Kennedy Plaza were reopened. A legal review process was established to audit citations issued under repealed ordinances. They called it the Rivera Protocol. Daniel was invited to speak at the city council meeting. He stood before the council, no longer homeless, no longer invisible, and said, I was cited 17 times for being homeless. Not for being dangerous, not for committing real crimes, but for sleeping, for existing in public, because I had nowhere else to be. We don't need more citations. We need more compassion. We need systems that help instead of punish. We need people to ask why someone is homeless before they decide how to respond. The council gave him a standing ovation. 6 months after that, Daniel Rivera was hired as a permanent part-time literacy specialist at the Providence Public Library. He works 20 hours a week helping struggling readers. He still volunteers additional hours because, in his words, these kids save me as much as I'm helping them. Today, Daniel has his own apartment. He's stable on his medications. He attends a veterans support group every Thursday. He's teaching again, which was all he ever wanted to do. And it started because I asked one question: what did you do before you became homeless? That question costs nothing. It takes seconds, but it changes everything. Because it acknowledges that homelessness is something that happened to a person, not something that defines them. If this story moved you, subscribe to this channel. Share it with anyone who works with homeless populations, with veterans, with anyone who's struggling to survive in a system that seems designed to keep them down. And the next time you see a homeless person, remember, they were something before they were homeless. They had jobs, families, dreams, skills. They are veterans and teachers and parents and human beings. They're not defined by their current circumstances. They're temporarily without housing, but they're permanently valuable, permanently deserving of dignity, permanently worthy of being seen. That's what Daniel Rivera taught me. That's what that one question revealed. And that's what justice should always remember. We're not here to punish poverty. We're here to see the humanity in everyone who walks through that door and respond accordingly. Court adjourned.